In this lesson, we're taking a look at basic chord construction, so we're going to be covering what intervals are found in common chords such as majors, minors, power chords, sus chords, which can be really valuable knowledge as a musician. This is part of my intermediate theory course, which is linked in the description below. In the previous lessons, we looked at how intervals work and what they sound like, so check those out if you haven't already. There's also a link to my Patreon page where you can download some further reading and diagrams if you prefer to consume content in that way. But for now, let's dive in and see how these chords are formed. So we're going to start with possibly the simplest chord of the lot, which is a power chord. Now, power chords only contain two intervals, which are the root note and the perfect fifth. And this is why you might also hear them referred to as five chords. So on song charts and tabs and things, you might see a C5, meaning a C power chord. And the only two notes that would be involved in that chord would be a C as the root note and then a G as the perfect fifth of C. And to give you an example of a power chord on guitar, we could use this as our root note and then add the perfect fifth, and then together you're hearing the full power chord. But often on guitar we'll also add the root note an octave higher, so we end up with this 3-note power chord. If I play that for you, we've got root note, then the fifth, then the octave. But obviously it's still just made up of those two intervals because the octave is simply just another root note. Now we're going to move on to triads, meaning 3-note chords. Think like a triangle has 3 sides or a tricycle has 3 wheels. And the most common types of triads that we use are major and minor chords. So if we start with major, a major chord is built using a root note, a major third and a perfect fifth. That's root note, major third and perfect fifth. Those are the 3 intervals used to build a major chord. So for example, in the key of C, for a C major, we'd have C as the root note, E would be the major third, and G would be the perfect fifth. And to give you an example of this on guitar, we could use this as the root note, then add the major third, then add the perfect fifth, and together we get our major chord. Moving on to minor, and in a minor chord we have a root note, a minor third, and a perfect fifth. So you should notice that it's very similar to major. The only thing that's changing is we're swapping out the major third for a minor third. So you would say that the third controls the tonality of a chord, essentially the major or minorness of the sound. And to give you an example, in the key of C, for a C minor chord, C would be the root note, E flat would be the minor third, and G would be the perfect fifth. And to show you an example on guitar, we can use this as the root note, add the minor third, add the perfect fifth, and then together we get the minor chord. And as I mentioned, it's only 1 note different from a major chord, so I'm just changing the note on the G string here. Here's the major, change that 1 note, here's the minor. So you can clearly hear the difference that only changing that 1 note makes. Now, I'm purposefully using simple examples to demonstrate, but you might be thinking, if triads only contain 3 notes, how come we can play versions of these chords on guitar using more than 3 strings at once, as is the case with most open chords? And that's where it's important to know the difference between a chord type and a chord voicing. Now, a chord type is essentially the name of the chord, for example, major, minor, sus chord, 7th chord, power chord, and this is defined by the combination of intervals found in that chord. For example, as we've seen, a major chord contains a root note, a major third, and a perfect fifth. Now, so long as the chord contains exactly those intervals and no others, it has to be a major chord. Now, those intervals don't have to be arranged in ascending order or anything like that, and we can also have multiples of any of those intervals spread out across different octaves. For example, if we take a look at an E major chord, what you're actually hearing here is root note, fifth, root, major third, fifth, root. Then, as we mentioned, you only have to change the third to swap between major and minor, so that's why you only have to take the first finger off to get to that E minor. So now you're hearing root, fifth, root, minor third, fifth, root. So if a chord type essentially gives you a list of intervals, like a list of ingredients in a meal, the voicing is more like the recipe which shows you exactly how to put them together. So the voicing is the layout of intervals in a specific version of a chord, and 2 voicings of the same chord can sound vastly different. For example, I'll use a G chord. If I use this big chunky G chord down the bottom of the neck, it sounds really different to this high-pitched funky G chord at the top. So different voicings can have really different sounds, and it's important to use the right type of voicing for the song that you're playing to get the right sound. And I think for that reason, it's important to know the difference between chord types and chord voicings. So with that cleared up, let's check out some more chords. So now we'll take a look at sus chords, and you should be familiar with the idea that we've got these two options of a sus2 or a sus4. Now, sus chords are very similar to major and minor in that the root and the perfect fifth stay put, but the key characteristic of sus chords is that we're going to replace the third either with a major second in a sus2 or with a perfect fourth in a sus4. So the number in the chord name directly correlates with the interval found in the chord. So just to clarify, in a sus2 chord we have a root note, a major second and a perfect fifth. So for example, in the key of C, that would be C, D and G in a C sus2 chord. And in a sus4, we have a root note, a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. So in a C sus4 chord, we'd have C, F and G. Now, as I mentioned, the third is what controls the major or minorness of a chord, and in a sus chord we're removing the third, so susses are neither major nor minor. You would describe them as being tonally neutral. And this is why you can use sus chords as embellishments when playing either major or minor chords in songs, which is a really commonly done thing and a really great way to make your chord progressions more interesting. So to give you guitar examples, here is a sus2, so we've got the root note, the major second and the perfect fifth, and together you get the sus2 sound, and for the sus4 we've got a root note, a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. Now just before we finish, I want to discuss add chords because I think it's good to understand the difference between them and sus chords. And you might have heard of an add 2 or an add 9, particularly on guitar. C add 9 is a really commonly used chord. Now the difference is whereby in a sus chord we replace the third with a different interval. In an add chord we're going to keep the third and add an extra interval to the chord as well, as the name might suggest. So an add 2 chord contains a root, a major second, major third and perfect fifth. So in the key of C, a C add 2 would be a C, D, E and G. And then for the add 9, all we're doing is we're taking that major second and throwing it up an octave, so it ends up being the 9th step in the scale rather than the second. So it's just a different voicing to an add 2. And you'll find if you play that common C add 9 shape on guitar, that the C and the D are an octave apart, so the C is on the A string, the D is on the B string, and having them that far away is a really pleasant sound. And it comes about because the D is 9 steps up the C major scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there it is, and it's in that chord. Now this exact same concept can be applied to add 4 and add 11 chords, and we can also use these chord extensions in a minor context as well. For example, an E minor add 9 is a really nice chord on guitar. And there are some good examples of ninths being used in songs by The Police. For example, Every Breath You Take, and Message in a Bottle. They both use this idea of a ninth because it's the 9th note in the scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's how you get that sound. Hopefully that helps you get started with chord construction. We're going to be revisiting this later in the series when we look at 7th chords, which are kind of the next level of complexity. But in the next lesson, we're going to add to this knowledge and look at how common scales are built also, such as major, minor and pentatonic scales. Remember, the full theory course is linked in the description below, and you can also download those extra resources from Patreon. There's a few diagrams showing comparison charts of all the different intervals and different chords, so it can definitely be helpful to see the information written out that way. Be sure to subscribe for more content and give this video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next lesson.